This recording is protected by copyright. No part may be reproduced without the prior permission of the University of South Australia.
Good evening, everybody. Good evening. My name is Donald Trump. That's fake news. My name is Nigel Relph. I'm Deputy Vice-Chancellor here at the University, and I'm really delighted to welcome you all this evening for this very special event, which is on the subject of fake news. I'd like to acknowledge that this event is taking place on Ghana land and pay respect to the Ghana people and elders past, present and future. We're at the end of quite a long day today. We have colleagues here from Alliance Française and from the French Embassy. We've been holding a French Day for our students, and the purpose of that really is to introduce French expertise to our student body and encourage them to think about exchanges and work placements in France. And I think it's been quite successful. We probably had I don't know, maybe 300 students in total today having access to colleagues from French universities. So France is leading in many, many areas. And the reason our friend, Professor Arnaud Mercier, is here today is because he is a leading expert in the whole area of new media, I suppose you call it, social media and indeed fake news. And we're hoping that we can learn from him. So once again, I'd like to welcome you all here tonight on behalf of the University of South Australia and also the Bob Hawke Prime Ministerial Centre. Tonight's lecture is presented by the Hawke Centre, Alliance Française d'Adelaide, the Embassy of France in Australia and The Conversation. It's part of the French-Australian Conversation series and is presented in conjunction, as I just mentioned, with the French Day UniSA. I'd like to thank the Hawke Centre team, Jacinta, Renee and the others for putting all this together. Just to mention to you, the session tonight is being recorded and a video of the event will be available on the Hawke Centre website next week. Just a little reminder to switch your phones to silent, please, if you would. Is he checking to make sure he's turned his own phone to silent? I hadn't. Now, the format tonight is there's going to be a short presentation from Arnaud, maybe 10 minutes or so, and then a discussion. So just to introduce our speakers this evening, as I say, Professor Arnaud Mercier. So Arnaud has a PhD in political science. He's a professor of information and political communication at the Université Paris 2 Panthéon-Assas. He is president and chairman of the board for Conversation France, The Conversation France. His research is on journalism, social media in the electoral context, and political communication. And he's recently published, in collaboration with Peter Lang, Political Campaigning on Twitter, the EU Elections 2014 in the Digital Sphere. We're also delighted to welcome tonight Misha Ketchell. Misha is managing editor of The Conversation, a news and analysis site written by researchers and academics. He was previously editor of Crikey, founding editor of The Big Issue Australia, editor of the Melbourne Weekly, and a reporter and feature writer on The Age. More recently, he's worked as a researcher and a producer on ABC TV's Media Watch, 7:30 Report, and online at the Drum. Welcome, Misha. And Tory Shepherd. Tory really needs no introduction. She's the state editor of the Advertiser. It's okay this time. And one of the paper's senior columnists. After finishing honours in anthropology and a master's in communication, she was a cadet at the paper a decade ago. She covered state politics, police rounds and health before absconding, it says here, to fill in as editor of the Punch, a national opinion website, and the Advertiser lured her back initially to cover federal politics. The state editor is shifting her focus more towards state issues. And it says here she is a humanist, a feminist, and a Chile fanatic. All our speakers this evening are very welcome. I think we're going to have a very interesting evening. So please join me in welcoming our panel to the stage.
Thank you very much for the invitation. And I apologize for my terrible French accent. And someone say, no, it's not a problem, it's sexy. So I self-confident, but I stay confident. and for my mistake in English, you will discover easily that I'm not fluent, but I will try to do my best to be understandable. I want to speak about fake news with you because I think it's a real problem, a real issue, because I think that democracies are in danger because fake news makers using tools of democracy against democracy. So I think that we must be aware of the fact that it's a big issue now, and we must fight against fake news. And for instance, at the beginning of June in Paris, I organized a conference fighting against fake news with teachers, with librarians who make some process to learn the way to fight against fake news, to recognize fake news for students, for scholars, and I think it's something very important, and I have decided that it will be my research program for 2 or 3 years now, because I'm really convinced that it's a crucial problem for our democracies. And I want to say with you that we are all responsible for the climate of fake news and post-truth. Post-truth is associated with fake news, and we must be aware of the fact that we have all the responsibility to fight against this phenomena. So, phenomenon, yes. Obviously, historians, my colleagues in France, for instance, will usefully remind us that manipulation are old as antiquity, that the lie in politics was already omnipresent before the internet. Of course, they are right. Rumor is the oldest media in the world, as the title of a famous book of a French sociologist colleague, Jean-Noël Capferrer. But I think that it's very interesting that the term fake news exploded during the American elections in September 2016. And of course the term existed before, but now it's a real issue, and the term is general. And I think that English-speaking person invented the term fake news, and fake news is not false news. It's something different, because with fake news we have the problem of forgery. We forge false information to deceive, okay? So the term fake news is very important, and fake news is associated to post-truth. Post-truth, word of the year for the Oxford Dictionary in 2016, because on the base of democracy is that we can contest the interpretation of facts. We can have different options, different ideological perception of facts, of the way to change reality, but we are agree about the fact. And this is the base of democracy. And on the context of post-truth, the danger comes from the fact that some politicians, for instance Donald Trump, contest the reality of facts. And we have a good example with his pledge. he said it was the most successful pledge on the history of American president, and all pictures proved that it was not right, that it was exactly the contrary. And for instance, just for Obama, it's clear that it was more successful for Obama than for Donald Trump. But Donald Trump and his staff said, no problem, okay, you have your proof, you have your pictures, but it's alternative facts. What it is? Perhaps it's the new term in English for lie, I think. So I affirm that this context, this climate of fake news and post-truth, in this context, we have all the responsibility of this climate. So, but some are responsible, and I think that some are guilty for this climate. Guilty, for instance, those politicians of all camps and countries who believe in the area of the all-powerful communication that to be elected or to achieve its ends, it just have to make bigger liars and more sophisticated. For instance, to decide the American public opinion to go to war in Iraq, you know well that they invent the idea of weapons of weapon of mass destruction. Okay, and it was, of course, weapons of mass communication, and so. Politicians are guilty in the way to create an atmosphere of lies everywhere. Certain politicians, of course. So they're part of responsibility. Guilty also what we call the merchants of doubt. Merchants of doubt are all those communicators and lobbyists who trample on the ethical charters of their profession and are ready to twist the facts in order to deny the achievements of science to defend the interest of their industrial customers. For instance, we know well the tobacco papers. We have discovered with this internal document that the industry of tobacco knew very well the effect of tobacco for cancer, for instance, and we know that on the same time, publicly they said exactly the contrary, saying that no, we are not sure, it's impossible to prove a link between cigarettes and cancer, and they had some expertise that proved the contrary, but they prefer to pay some scientists. I prefer not to call them colleagues. Some scientists who said, oh, yeah, to try to blur the reality, saying, yes, it depends on the way you smoke or on the way you use cigarettes with other things like alcohol, like etc. So they try to blur the reality just to avoid the responsibility of industry, of course. So they are guilty also in the way to deny the reality to protect some industrial interests. Responsible also the journalists and the media, more generally, who do their work wrongly because they accept to publish some approximative news, preferring approximation to a very verified news, of course. So they create the lack of trust on the public, because now with certain media we have always adopted about the accuracy of what they are saying. So I think it's something very important that journalists may be aware of the fact that they have their part of responsibility on those climates, and they have to change their way to practice journalism to become, perhaps again, some people in which we trust. We trust in God in certain countries, and we must, in democracy, trust in journalism, in journalists. It's very important. And I think that, personal that the success of the conversation comes from this kind of contract we respect, saying that on the website, the conversation, we have experts, they knew exactly of what they are speaking, they do not try to convince you, they do not try to defend an ideological point of view, they are just trying to establish fact, reality of the facts, and to explain, to give you some explanation of the facts. So I think, with the example of the conversation, that it's possible for media to win the battle of credibility. Responsible, of course, social network platforms like Facebook, that has never fought spontaneously against fake news. Why? Because fake news is a business. And Facebook earns money with fake news. And there is a vicious circle. They earn more money with fake news than with real news. Because fake news are more shared, more liked than real news, unfortunately, but this is the sad word now. So Facebook didn't make what a newspaper should admit, yes, because they earn more money with fake news. Okay, so it's very crucial that politicians, that institutions create make pressure against social network platform like Facebook, Twitter, etc., because spontaneously they will not do nothing, because their business model are on yes, enfin, you understand, on stake, right, it was the term, on stake, sorry. For instance, the way to make money with Facebook and fake news is very clear when we remember the example of Macedonian students that create fake news about Donald Trump, and they earn yes, it's okay, it's okay. $10,000 for each article fake. Okay? It's a little money for students, but it was money, of course. Responsible to the social scientists, me, my colleagues, that lead to absurd yet stimulating the theory of social construction of reality. Because with the idea on what you call in English-speaking country French theory, Jacques Derrida, etc. Because the result of the idea that everything is a social construction of reality, the result of that is an appalling relativism, where an inert body without brain activity, no heartbeat, did not die, as long as is not known socially. One of my colleagues defended this point of view. I said, yes, no brain, so he is dead. No. If no one knows he is dead, he is not socially dead. Okay. So I think that, of course, it's crazy, but of course we have a part of responsibility on this climate of skepticism, general skepticism and general doubt, post-truth area. Responsible also, the parodic news website. I like satirical news website, like in France, Le Gorafi, like The Onion, for instance. I think they are very funny because they imitate very well journalistic style, of course. And it's so absurd that I think, for me, it's funny. But they have the part of responsibility, because with this kind of satirical content, they contribute to blur the frontier between real information and bad news, perhaps not bad news, but fake news, of course. So I think it's something strange, something to try to understand why are so successful all this kind of satirical news website on this moment. But I have no answer, but I can consider that they're part of responsibility on this climate. Responsible, of course, and I think guilty, political activist, perhaps better to say activist with H and K, because most often they are extremists, far right or far left, of course. They are responsible because, and guilty, because they use fake news to serve their propaganda, to serve their political agenda with hate speech, xenophobia, etc. Guilty also foreign powers such as Russia, China, North Korea, for instance, who built troll factories with true information strategy, InfoWar, to polarize and fracture our societies in order to defend their geopolitical interest. Something very interesting is the ads that Facebook published coming from a Russian institution. And we can observe that we are not on the Cold War area, because during the Cold War it was simple. We are communists, we are socialists, and you are liberal, so we fight against, with an ideological point of view, we defend communists against democracy, Western democracy, etc. It was simple. In this case, what we discovered? We discovered that Russia paid for ads that defend both point of view. They paid for information, for ads, for the defense of the Second Amendment, and they pay on the same time ads for the regulations for a gun control, okay, in United States. Okay, so it's very interesting because the interpretation is easy. They want to break the society. They want that each camp fight together, and never mind the point of view that dominates on this fight. The important is to sustain the fight to break our societies. And to finish, finally, we are all responsible. Me, you, everyone. Everyone who gave up one day or another the temptation to like or to share dubious content because we never know, perhaps it's true, not sure, but perhaps, or because if it's not true, it's still funny. And responsible because we click on the button share on the sole faith of the title without even opening the link. And also because under the shock of the news, for instance, a terrorist attack, we are disoriented, yes. We lose our critical reflexes and perhaps we succumb to the temptation of the spectacular or the emotions, for instance. And we share bullshit, we share fake news. So we are all responsible for this climate of fake news and post-truth. And this is the reason why I think that we must be aware that we are all responsible to fight against fake news. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Arnaud. That was terrific and a very nuanced explication of the ways in which different actors in this sort of modern media age are responsible for contributing to misinformation. Just so everyone's aware, what we're going to do now is I'm just going to briefly touch on one point before getting Tory to provide a response. Then we're going to have a little brief discussion here, and then we're going to open to questions from the floor and have a bit of a dialogue for the remaining bit of the session. Just one point, Arnaud, that you made that I really wanted to pick up on, because I think it was a really good point, was that everybody is responsible. We all have a level of responsibility, but we have different levels of guilt or different levels of responsibility in our roles for fake news. And I think that's really important. The point you were making very early on about the term fake news is really instructive here. The term fake news was coined by a journalist called Craig Silverman, who was writing for BuzzFeed during the 2016 US election. And it was a very specific term. It was talking about, as you mentioned, Macedonian teenagers who were making up stories that were untrue, that they knew to be untrue, and were for profit, right? So the terms are, the story has to be untrue, you've got to know it's untrue, and it's made up for profit. Very quickly, Donald Trump and others took that term, fake news, and started using it in a loose way to talk about everything they didn't like in reporting. The term went from being something quite specific, a new phenomenon in a way that we hadn't seen. Yes, we've always had rumours, we've always had misinformation, but this world where we're in an attention economy where the accuracy of information is so irrelevant that you can be successful with something that it sets out to be misinformation from beginning to end. That term was degraded almost immediately by Trump and others. Now, the question we've got to ask ourselves is why? What's at stake there? And for me, what's at stake is the distinctions we need to make. When Trump says the New York Times is fake news, he might be right to say the New York Times has made a mistake or got something wrong, or the Washington Post or another media outlet. But there is a fundamental difference between a New York Times story that has a fault and a story that is made up to mislead people. Fundamental difference. And we actually need to create, if we're going to fight back against fake news, one of the things that we need to do is create an audience that is literate in those distinctions, that can actually say, this is made up as a deliberate lie, this is partly right, partly wrong, this is somebody who's got a vested interest, this is somebody who's got an ideological barrier to push, this is a work of journalism that has got all the flaws that journalism always has, but it is something that's been created by somebody who's trying to inform the public. And by actually insisting on those distinctions, the distinction between fake news and something that is imperfect journalism or maybe slightly misinformation or it's got flaws, that's how actually we can create, in my view, an information ecosystem that is more productive, that actually will sort of fight back against this phenomenon. But I think one thing that you did make very clear was the extent to which this phenomenon has spread and how widely it's spread. And one of the things I do worry about when we see that is, you know, how hard it is to think of a way back, like what can be done about this, and really particularly what the role of journalists is in addressing this. And Tory, I think that would be a really good point for you, because obviously as a...
Just one point. Some colleagues know, because of the strategy of the reversal stigma, prefer the term junk news.
Junk news, yeah.
Junk news, no.
Yeah, which is, sort of degraded news. So, Tory, just to pick up, what were the key things that Arnaud said that you agreed and disagreed with? And just as a second level of that, what do you think journalists in particular can do to deal with this problem?
Sure. First of all, can I add a category to all the categories you just mentioned, which is the terminally misled, you know, your Pete Evans saying sunscreen's bad for you, or the people who think carrots will cure cancer. For me, they're the things I see spread most often on Facebook, which are another category, I guess, of fake news. So I completely agreed with you, Arnaud, about the massive spread of responsibility for misinformation and fake news. And do we need a whole new term to encompass all the things that are wrong that are shared? I was saying to these guys before, yeah, everyone's responsible, but not my dad, right? Because he hardly uses Facebook, and he's very literate, and he would never click on crap. He just wouldn't. And then actually I found out the other day he's following a fake Tory Shepherd who promises that he can lose 10 kilos in 3 weeks. So a lot of people are ultimately pretty susceptible to it. I guess there's a maybe more optimistic side of things that I'd like to talk about, which is the people who are fighting back. So they may be responsible. I'm sure I've retweeted something that turned out not to be true. It's so impossible when things move so fast to be entirely sure of everything all the time, which is a sad state of affairs. But at the same time, there seems to be a bit of a boom in fact-checking websites. Snopes is doing a roaring trade, which does a great job of debunking myths that spread around very swiftly. BuzzFeed, which I know a lot of mainstream media would roll their eyes at, are actually doing a really good job in, in the event of terrorist attacks or big traumatic events, of working out which photos are fake and which are real. Of course, The Conversation, the Australian Science Media Centre, there are organisations working out there to directly battle, well, bullshit is I guess the umbrella term that we're looking for here. And journalists have a massive role in that, which comes down to trust. So I think one of the most important things you spoke about is there is a value on fake news. There's a price on it. It's worth money to people. So how can we make people recognise that the truth is somehow has a higher value than the fake news? I think that's really difficult, but I think there are a lot of opportunities in the very same technology that produces fake news, which is that people can curate their feeds, find the people they trust, the conversation, of course, whoever else comes along, and hopefully start to see the value in the places that are spreading truth. But I also feel like that is a really Pollyanna view of the world. They're so disparate right now in terms of what they're doing. I don't know how you could ever get to a point where the truth has more value than the bullshit online, and that's pretty sad.
So Arnaud, you were, quite clear. You mentioned the role of the platforms of the technology.
Yeah.
To what extent? I mean, you also mentioned that we've had misinformation for a long time in the form of rumours. There's always been misinformation out there. To what extent do you think this is a technological problem?
Oh, I really think.
Yeah.
I really think, because I think that there is a new ecosystem, what I call the social-digital ecosystem of information now. And on this new ecosystem, the problem is that the frontier are blurred between journalists, some citizen who produce what they call information, and they use the term citizen journalist. I hate this term, because if you are citizen, you are citizen. If you are journalist is a job with some rules. Sometimes we are desperate because we think that journalists not straight their rules, but they don't apply their rules. But we think that we have more and more people who think, because they have with blogs, with Facebook, with Twitter, they have the opportunity to express publicly their point of view, and they transform the point of view on information, on news, and it's not news. Okay, so we are. I think that since 10 years we are on the far west, without any rules, without any regulations, and now we are aware, with Brexit, with Donald Trump, that there is something to do. And European Union react, for instance, with a very strong regulation, with personal data, with responsibility about the way that terrorists use social media for their propaganda. So I think I am a little bit optimist, because now we enter the area of regulation of social media, because we are totally aware of the cost of total liberty on social media. And another part, I think that, for instance, young students use less and less Facebook, for instance. They prefer Snapchat, they prefer...
So they're not getting any information?
Yeah. Perhaps. So I think the most active users of Facebook are also aware of the problem with this kind of platform. And so I think it's a new area, but we have to be active on this new area.
It's interesting. Facebook and Google are coming under a lot of pressure all over the world, really to behave more like journalists used to behave in terms of sorting their information, providing some ways for people to know what information is reliable and what isn't. Tory, do you think regulation of Facebook and Google can work? And I guess my other question is, do you think Australia, for example, which is got an interest here in protecting our own civil society discussion, our own democratic process, do you think we have any power to influence the way that Facebook and Google are regulated? Because ultimately, the decisions about what they do on their platform will probably be made by senators in the US.
Look, I think regulation's really tricky. It's a good conversation to have, but how do you do it without impinging on freedom of speech will be, I'm sure, the subject of a 3-year-long Senate inquiry that we'll all hear Erica Betts talk about interminably. I think the first step probably would be to be able to understand the algorithms behind a lot of these platforms. I've spoken to people online at work about how, Facebook changed their algorithm and it completely affects what happens to all the stories that we put out, and they can't see rhyme or reason. It's like Mark Zuckerberg downed a bottle of tequila and just changed a few switches in the back room and everything goes haywire. So transparency for me would be the first step. Look, I think Australia will be able to have an influence on what they decide to do. I mean, we're a small part of the market, but they're still making billions out of us, I imagine. I just don't see how you get to I think you could regulate Facebook and how they deal with their algorithms, and you can regulate things that become hate speech or incitement to violence or any of those sorts of things. And then you'd still be left with this grey area of Pete Evans and his sunscreen and what you do about that. And then hopefully that's where the market kicks in and you can convince people not to click on the crap.
But it is a fundamental problem with the platforms in a way, because what used to happen was the role that journalists performed was really as almost cops on the beat, policing the public sphere. So if I was a health reporter in a major daily newspaper and I got somebody saying this new study says that this new, drinking lots of, orange juice is going to stop me getting cancer, and it's sponsored by an orange juice company, I would treat that with a level of scepticism. And
you'd crap yourself that you're going to end up on Media Watch, which is one of the best watchdogs. Yeah.
And I would, actually part of my job would be weeding that out, right? And that would be what journalists used to do, and they were in charge, right? Because the means of public communication, there were fewer of them and fewer people got to have a say, and there were a lot of bad things about that. But there was a cop on the beat. Now what we've got is a Facebook and a Google, and all they care about is attention. It doesn't matter if it's true, doesn't matter if it's accurate, doesn't matter if it's right.
Exactly.
There's absolutely none of that built in. It's literally an attention economy. It can be a cat video, it can be nonsense, it can be misinformation, it can be absolutely anything, because they're just monetising attention. And they've said all the way along, we do not care, we're not journalists, we take no responsibility. I actually recently had some meetings with both Facebook and Google, because the government is currently holding an inquiry into the role of the digital platforms. And one of the senses that I got that was somewhat depressing was, although they are aware of these problems and they are thinking about them, there's a very real sense in which you can tell that for Facebook and Google, Australia is largely irrelevant. They're American businesses that are regulated in the US. Europe has done a very good job with its privacy laws and with some other laws of reeling them in. They make a lot of money in Australia, but I don't think decisions for this global platform are going to be dictated by what Australians happen to think. And that is a problem if what you're trying to do is create a public square where people can communicate with some confidence and share ideas and actually know what the facts are, have trusted information. So I guess I'm a little pessimistic on that.
Well, yeah, I think pessimism... Oh, sorry, I'll just quickly say... Facebook just keeps saying over and over again, we are not publishers, but it's not our job, we're something different. So none of those rules will ever apply.
But things are changing because a few years ago, Obama and Congress said the idea, the reflection in European Union about a regulation of Facebook and Twitter was protectionism, okay? Saying we are here to defend the interest, the industrial interest of social network platform. And now, on the Congress, some people say, oh, it's a good job. We have to imitate what they have done on European Union. So things are changing.
Yeah.
Of course, it's more difficult when you are a little country, for the population, not for the, of course. And it's easier for European Union because with more than 500 million, it's easier, of course, because it's a market. So Facebook must change because he has to adapt to the new rules to stay on this big market. Of course, it's easier. But I think that this is a wave, I think.
Okay.
I am optimistic.
You are an optimist.
Okay, and on that, I think we should open up to questions from the floor. Now, I'm just not quite sure. How long do we have left? So how long do we have? Okay, great. Excellent. Plenty of time for questions. So we've got one roving microphone. If people could put up their hands, please, and we'll just go. Lady here first. Yep. Thank you.
Yes, Constance Lever-Tracy. My background is sociology for many, many decades. And sociologists, of course, wanted to know about the discourse, not about the reality behind the discourse. Now, my moment of conversion to the idea of fact and truth, which completely overturned quite a few decades as a sociologist, was about 15 years ago. And it was a report, which some of you may remember, of American submarines that had gone under the Arctic a number of years before and had observed that the ice was melting. But they didn't publicise it when they came back because they didn't think it was of any great interest to anybody. And it wasn't reported until several years later. So I just want to ask whether we have here also, and that converted me, and I became an obsessive with the reality of climate change, which even scientists for a long time said, well, we can't be sure. We know it'll happen sometime in the future, but we don't know if it's yet. But what I want to ask is whether part of the idea of fake news might also be fake non-news, that something is not discussed and is not talked about, perhaps because nobody has an interest in talking about it, or perhaps because it doesn't seem relevant.
Thanks. That's a terrific question.
Unknown unknowns. So after years of social anthropology, I saw the relativistic argument about truth, but we'd well and truly moved past it by then. I guess you'd have to ask, what is it, do you think, is not being reported that is out there? I'm sorry, I'm actually not familiar with the submarine story. It sounds like a fascinating one. My immediate kind of concern would be if people are saying, well, there is news out there but no one's reporting it, that's a conspiracy-style thought. Obviously, working for News Limited, you get accused quite a lot of covering up various sorts of truth. For me, that's usually that vaccines cause autism, chemtrails are controlling the population. There's, I'm sure you see what I say. So when I get accused of not covering something that should be covered, it's usually because it's bullshit. So I'd be interested to know if do you feel there's something that is not being covered at the moment that would change the nature of how people perceive the world? Please don't say chemtrails.
Well, certainly I have noticed what seems to be a decline in talking about climate change. Maybe because we can't think of what we can do about it, maybe because the interests of fossil fuel companies have now shut down certain talk about it.
Yeah, look, I think that's certainly happening. I mean, you've seen the conversation now switch more to power prices and the evils versus the goods of renewables, and climate change barely gets a mention. I guess that's a discourse driven by governments, certainly, you know, the Greens and Labor and the government itself still talk about climate change. I do have the feeling it's lost some of its urgency, though, and I agree that's probably something media should do better at. I feel the same way about the ageing population. We get these reports every now and then about a looming crisis, but it's very hard to maintain an ongoing sense of urgency in those conversations. But I'd go cock up over conspiracy on that one. We're not sort of deliberately not talking about it. It's just that the news cycle is its own beast.
Just one thing to add on that, I think there's been a really interesting change in the way that the media's worked. Going back sort of 20 or 30 years, where I was talking about the role of journalists as gatekeepers who would filter what could or couldn't be in the public sphere. And I was talking about some of the work they do, sorting out what's true and what's not, and that's valuable. But one of the downsides of that model was that journalists were very bad often at making decisions about really interesting topics like your submarine story or like climate science. What used to happen was journalists would have a very set idea about what audiences would be interested in. And audiences would be very geographically located. So you'd be publishing for the readers of the Melbourne Age or the Sydney Morning Herald or the Canberra Times or the Adelaide Advertiser, rather than thinking about a community that might be interested in climate science, which actually is a global community, and it's a global problem. And what's happened is that we now have media outlets that can publish and talk to global audiences, and those conversations can take place in a way that perhaps they might not have been able to before. So the digital revolution has allowed in a lot more voices, a lot more conversations amongst experts or sort of different groups. And I think some of the conversation you're talking about, you're saying is missing. I think, Tory, you're absolutely right. Politically, it's been pushed out. The focus is on energy prices. So in sort of that real mainstream media space, the major daily newspapers, TV, there is less of that conversation absolutely at that level. I think that's really true. I still think there's a lot of it going on at other levels. So if you want to find it, and there are huge networks of people who really know about this stuff who you can tap into. Anna, did you have something?
Yeah. First of all, now in Adelaide, you can be confident all story with submarine will be published. More seriously, I think I don't accept the confusion between fake news and no news. I think it's totally different. Because fake news, I have spoken about that, but for no news, you have to admit, we have to admit the fact that we must be prepared to accept reality, to accept fact. And it's true for you personally, it's true for people, it's true for a country. Of course, all the realities are not acceptable at certain times. And it's not a plot, it's not a conspiracy. It's not problem of this. It's not problem of conspiracy. It's just a problem of psychology, I think so. So it's very difficult for journalists to be Wonder Woman or Superman who are prepared to accept the reality that all the country cannot accept. So I think that for climate change, it's impossible to change our mind just on one day. It's a long process. So perhaps in this case, I don't know this case, but perhaps in this case, it was difficult to accept the facts, to be totally aware of the importance of the facts. And I think it's a crucial problem for media, but it's not it's not a reason to consider that journalists are guilty for that.
Okay, thank you. Now, more, can everyone put their hands up again? Sorry, I just didn't see everybody before. Lady here in the grey. I'll sort of work my way back towards the back and then I'll come back down. Yep.
Hi. One of the problems, I think, is there's so much information available nowadays and people get overwhelmed with it. And Obama said about listening and watching ISIS videos to get an understanding because of these cylinders that people have their information and, you know, and to me it seems that a lot of people now are just playing the person, not the argument. So you have your silos of information, people brand the Advertiser or certain media outlets or whatever, or the Bolt Report or the, you know, the Hannity's in the States and whatever. And I try and watch both Fox and CNN to try and get, you know, a balanced view. But that takes forever. And the thing that I see, or is there a way that you can have both the arguments, but have, you know, comparison of them? I know you have, like now there's the weekly list, which shows all Trump's, you know, new normalisations, but only people that are probably anti-Trump will want to read that. So is there a way that you see that journalism or the media, like people like Hannity who aren't even journalists, the American public or a proportion of them, will just listen blindly to them? And same on the left. So it's a lot there, but, you know, is there a way that...
No, look, I think you've pinpointed the problem, which is echo chambers. You know, there are studies showing that people put the right search terms into Google to get the exact results that they were looking for. We curate our Twitter feeds to get the information that we already hope for, and we keep reinforcing these beliefs. I think it's a huge problem, and I was talking to Misha before about the democratisation of knowledge, where pretty much anyone, you know, anyone with an internet connection can get all the information in the world. They can get the climate databases for themselves and think they've debunked climate change. They can, so there's these floods and floods of information that are out of context that people without the training to comprehend are trying to comprehend. It's a flood. I guess the only answer on an individual basis is to try and curate your own intake in a way that also challenges you, which goes against your natural psychology to protect your own beliefs. But it is possible. I mean, I hate read some people, you know, I always disagree with them, but I better bloody read them, and then internally I'm practicing the argument against them, so I'm probably not really challenging my own beliefs. But I think the first step is probably, as with anything, acknowledging you have a problem.
I think one of the issues you've got is, you know, this idea that you're entitled to your own opinions but not to your own facts. And if you consume certain media outlets, they will actually give you a factually distorted picture of what's going on. And that can be very, very difficult to deal with because it actually infects your thinking. When I was working at Media Watch for a long time, part of my job was trawling through a lot of blogs written by different political players that were spreading different rumours, because I was, as a journalist, trying to get advance information of things. And I knew that these bloggers were notorious for making things up and using them to punish foes and reward friends. And
you don't want to name and shame, Misha?
No. But I used to read this stuff all the time, and I would have in my head, I'd say, this stuff is all suspect. I can't rely on its accuracy, and I know that. And then 3 days later, I found myself at a dinner party saying, I read the other day this, and I'd be like, oh no, that was one of those blogs. Right? Our brains are not good enough. They are not good enough to hold quality and poor information in different categories and not have them infect each other. So what we have to do, in my view, is we do have to seek out a wide range of opinions, but I think we've got to be quite ruthless about those opinions that are not factually based. I mean, I don't see, for me anyway, my understanding of the world, I'm just not going to watch Fox News because there's just too much that actually is fundamentally untrue. Now, it's not that I don't want to know those ideas. It's not that I'm ideologically opposed. I just think the misinformation will infect my mind too badly.
We need a vaccine.
That's the truth. That's the truth. So we'll keep going with the questions.
Yes.
Sorry, Arnaud, do you want to jump in? Yeah.
Yes. For instance, during the Iraq War, some colleagues realized a poll with 3 mistakes about Iraq. Saddam Hussein is associated to the 9/11 attack. Iraq possesses some massive weapons of massive destruction, and we have discovered some massive destruction, some massive
WMD.
WMD. Yes, weapon of massive destruction. We have discovered in Iraq since with the American army, and we test these mistakes with what you prefer, what TV you prefer to get news, and the result is clear. 72% of persons who watch Fox News have 3 mistakes, and 71% of persons who use PBS have less than one mistake. But the interpretation, you can say, okay, they used to watch Fox News, so it's an intoxication, it's a manipulation, so it's normal, the result is normal, and on the contrary for PBS. But we can consider also that they prefer to watch Fox News because they agree to earn what they want to earn. So it's very difficult to know exactly the sense of the influence, okay? And when I say the sense of the influence, Fox News is conservative. Fox News produce some special news.
Special news.
Special
Yeah.
production, okay? And they do it because they have a political agenda, but also because they think that this is what the public, what the audience want to hear.
And the ratings prove it.
So, you know, it's very difficult to know exactly the sense of the direction of the mutual influence on this case.
Okay, I'm going to keep working towards the back because I know I've got people from the front. So there in the blue, on the left, gentleman there.
Thank you. So my question's based around my understanding of marketing and journalism. If you were to advertise something incorrectly or falsely from a marketing perspective, my understanding is you would be forced to submit a retraction in the same medium in which you submit that initial advertisement or article. So my question is, does that methodology of a retraction have any grounds or any opportunity in a Facebook, Google medium?
It's interesting that you say that. One of the things that newspapers notoriously have been very bad at is correcting errors. You know, you get
correcting them proportionally.
Yeah, you get something on the front page saying, you know, so-and-so's done this terrible thing, and then, you know, 7 days later you get something in the back saying, actually, that wasn't true. You know, it's in tiny little point size. All of the evidence shows that even if you do correct the misinformation proportionately, so if you correct a front page story with a front page story, the misinformation will still persist.
Yes.
Believe it or not. All the evidence shows that. But once you've put that idea out there, even if you turn around and say it's wrong, some people will still carry that idea. So that means that journalists have a responsibility not to get it wrong in the first place. They actually, it's not good enough just to say we weren't wrong for long or we corrected it, because every time you put bad information in the public sphere, you're muddying the waters. But if you do it inadvertently, and we're not perfect, we all make mistakes all the time, what you should do, and this is where you're absolutely right, is correct in a way that's proportionate. So at the conversation, if we make an error, we have a policy that, and if we make an error substantial enough that we need to retract an article, we remove the article from the internet, we publish a separate article explaining why we've removed the article, and then we push that out through Facebook, through social media, to audiences. So rather than hiding from the mistake, we try to get on the front foot and let people know about the mistake. And even though that sort of slightly contradicts what I said about misinformation persisting, it's the best we can do to try to pull back where an error has been made.
I think the problem can be even bigger than just not contradicting the original misinformation. There's a growing body of work that shows even talking about stuff again can reinforce the original thought. So debunking is actually really hard. I'll go back to Pete Evans and his notion that sunscreen's dangerous. If you try and write a piece saying, Pete Evans, get out, here are all the reasons why it's not and why you should use sunscreen and so on. If you don't do it in the right way, people read it and it actually makes them think sunscreen, danger, Pete Evans, like it, and just sort of connect those things in their heads. So there are ways to do it. The latest study I read said that you have to be very clear with a disclaimer at the front that your article may, and sorry, this is moving away from the corrections actually, but it's the same principle. There has to be a disclaimer at the top saying this article contains references to other misleading stuff that we may have previously printed, which starts to sound pretty convoluted. But it's actually a sort of fledgling area of study which I hope will get better, because I think debunking is one of those areas that's fun for journalists, but also is where you could start to add the sort of value to news stories to get them shared, to try and outdo the fake news, possibly.
Sorry, just a small twist on that. A lot of your answers have been focused around what it is that you do as journalists. I suppose where I was going with that question is it possible to enforce someone like Facebook to automatically publish a correction for fake news? So if they intentionally or become aware of submitting some news that they then later are advised by a journalist or a credible source that was actually incorrect, would it then be possible through the same medium that they then publish that article to all of the feeds that receive it to then publish a correction?
Do you want to take that on?
Facebook is terribly hypocrite. They accept in the United States to fund some colleagues of University of California to experiment the effect, the impact of the creation of a signal saying, be careful, what is published looks like not fake, but perhaps special.
Yeah, dodgy.
Yes, okay. So there is a warning. Okay, be careful, we are not sure. Okay? The result of the experiments is that with this signal, the content is more shared than without.
It's like, do not click graphic image. Ooh.
Yeah. This is what I call the bishop effect. When the bishops say, don't go to watch this movie, everyone say, oh, there is something interesting in this movie. So I will go, okay? And the result of this result is that Facebook has said, 3 months after, as you see, there is a bad effect, a vicious effect of the warning, so we stop the warning. Okay? So don't be confident with Facebook. And their good faith to fight against fake news.
Okay. We've only got about 5 minutes left, so I'm just going to try to whip through some questions. Please try to keep them short, because I'll try to get in a few more. The lady up here in blue.
I just want to follow up on what Misha said and also what you've just said, Arnaud. Both of you talked about saying something at a party, and you've just talked about people talking amongst themselves and doing something. Isn't that the point, though, really? Isn't it the point that you should be reading everything that you want to, and the Chinese news and the Italian news, because people have fairly well concentrated on the English-speaking news, which is not always entirely fair to the rest of the world, and then you do go out and speak to everybody about it. You don't have this policy of don't talk about religion or whatever the other things are, money and whatever else you're not supposed to talk about, but you do talk about everything to everybody that you meet, so that you have some kind of filtering and bartering of what information is more acceptable and not so acceptable, and what is real and what is not real, because you get a more feel for it. Maybe that's just pie in the sky talking.
I think my short answer to that would be yes, absolutely, expose yourself to everything. But I just would say it's very easy to overestimate your ability to compartmentalise information that is suspect or that is unreliable. And what you will find is if you spend a lot of time consuming unreliable sources, you'll have a lot of unreliable information in your head. And that can be a problem. So I'm not saying that we shouldn't read voraciously and widely and seek out different perspectives. Absolutely, that's what every citizen and journalist should be doing. But we think we're better at resisting misinformation than we are. The same way that we think, because we know how advertising works, we think that we're immune to it. I don't know about you all, but when I see an ad on TV for chicken or something, I'm like, well, I know what they're trying to do. They're trying to manipulate me. It's dinner time, blah, blah, blah. But I'm still buying the chicken, right? It still gets you, even if you think your awareness guards you against the sort of information it doesn't.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, my example would be, all the products that are for sale for women's beauty stuff, and it's like, it's all rubbish, maybe I do have enlarged pores. Get me that expensive cream. Yeah, I think you're right, and that gets back to what I was saying before about it's very hard to keep checks and balances on yourself. I mean, I guess one of the critical skills that would be great for everyone to have is to at least know when to question their own beliefs. It's like in journalism, you get taught that with spelling, to know where you're not quite sure, that's when you go and check. And I guess luckily we do have Google on our phones for when we are out and we might want to recheck anything, but then we are in danger of going to the wrong website and reinforcing our beliefs. So
I'm just going to push it because there are a couple more questions, and I just want to get a couple more. The gentleman here in the black, just up here with the beard.
My name's Michael Jacobs. Come August, I will have been a member of the Journalists' Union for 49 years. My question is this anxious conversation in danger of trapping itself with short memories? Brief explanation. When a public figure, when a politician speaks, it's news. It doesn't matter if what they say is true or outrageous or demonstrably false. The fact that they have said it and they have power and influence makes that legitimate news. It used to be that when it was demonstrably false, the report always included a discreet, calmly expressed paragraph pointing out the falsity of what had been said. That practice decayed before any of the new media and the social media emerged, I would say about 20 to 25 years ago. What does the panel think about that?
I totally agree with you.
Yes, I'm with that.
I guess I'd love to know why. We can all talk a lot about how we're all more pressed for time, about how I take the tax conversation that we're having at the moment. I mean, it's pretty convoluted. There are 10 different kinds of modelling that I've seen that say different things. That's where you need a really good specialist writer. I'd say the decline in specialist writers is one of the issues there, because you've got people moving through rounds who might have only done them for 6 months, so they don't have the expertise to pick the falsity. But it sounds like if it was 25 years ago, that's before a lot of that started changing, and I can't imagine what the reason was for it back then.
Well, it sounds to me like what you're talking about is the world that I was talking about before, where journalists were sort of cops on the beat, and they were basically guarding the public sphere, and they were saying, no, that's not true, it's not going to get into the public sphere. And that was the role that journalists played. And the changing technology has really displaced that role for journalists, and now we're in a world where it is much more, we all accept it as a contested space, he said, she said, and the actual facts that underlie it, and making a determination on those. Often, journalists feel that it's not necessarily their role to do that, or that you can have this balance and just have two voices. I don't believe that. I think that's perpetuating misinformation. And I'd love to get back to the sort of world you're describing. But, Can
I say, actually, though, there are some people doing it. I mean, I pick on Catherine Murphy, maybe, at The Guardian. She does a very good job of fact-checking everything that comes out of people's mouths. Greg Jericho, also. There are people out there, but, it takes... That's today, and that's where the time and resource pressure is really huge. So there are still people... I would like to hope that we would all want to do exactly that if we had all the time and understanding in the world.
I'm sorry, we're over time, so I'm just going to have one more. And this lady at the very back up here on the left, we'll go to her. And that's going to be the last, I'm sorry, for everyone else who's been waiting.
Thank you. I will add a bias disclaimer at the start. I'm a qualified teacher librarian. I can't get a job as a teacher librarian in South Australia as yet. My question is, how do you see the role of librarians in general, and specifically teacher librarians, in countering the I'd write it down, the digital literacy that's needed to combat falling for fake news?
That's a great question. I actually was talking to a group of librarians in Victoria not long ago about this very topic. And it's interesting because one of the things that I think we've established is that the fact that we don't know what information we can trust is the result of the likes of Google and Facebook jumbling up good journalism and nonsense and fake news and cat videos and everything all in the one space, right? And their solution is to say, we're going to fund digital literacy projects. So basically, we'll put it back on the consumer to sort through all this information and work out what's reliable and what's not. I'm not sure that's a complete or sufficient answer from the platforms. I think that they should be doing better than that in terms of giving people a way of understanding the status of the information. If it's presented by a reputable outlet, there should be ways of labelling that so people can understand that. But there clearly is right now, more than ever, a massive demand for education for citizens and readers to actually be able to differentiate different sources of information and to know what they can trust. And I think the work that librarians can do in that space can be and will be hugely important. And there's a whole bunch of other people that need to be working on this as well. So, I think more power to you. And I think it's sort of a coming thing at the moment. People are really talking about this a lot, and digital literacy, even for children in their teens or even pre-teen, how important that is.
Yeah, look, I think you're never too young to develop a bullshit detector, and certainly librarians are a large part of that. That's all I had to say.
It's exactly the reason why I organized my conference with the National Association of Directors of University Libraries, because I think that you have a very important role to play on this new ecosystem, the role to pedagogical role, of course, with the problem of hierarchizations of information. What are the good sources? What coming from journalists or not? I think it's very, very important. And for instance, on this conference, we will celebrate good initiatives coming from librarians on each French universities to give some kit, a kit to have the how to say that, the good reflex in front of news, in front of fake news. So, welcome on the fight.
Thank you. We got to wrap it up there. Nicholas, are you going to get some?
Good evening, everyone. My name is Nicolas Duhaut. I am the attaché for higher education at the Embassy of France in Australia. So you're not done yet with the French accents. Almost there. This conference is coming. It's sexy. This conference is coming as a conclusion of what has been a fantastic, exciting, and exhausting French day at the University of South Australia today. So I would like to thank the university, Nigel, Jacinta, Chris, Tanya, and all the team for the fantastic job they have done in putting together this great event. Thank you very much for that. Thank you to Tory, Misha, and Arnaud for the very inspiring conversation. Very happy to see for the third time already the University of South Australia in collaboration with the Alliance Française of Adelaide, the French Embassy, the Conversation France, and the Conversation Australia, hosting a conference that brings together expertise from our two countries. I'm particularly pleased to welcome Arnaud Mercier to Australia again, because the idea when we started the French-Australian Conversations series was not only to have conferences like this one, but also to facilitate the establishment of long-lasting relationships and partnerships between French and Australian universities. So having Arnaud again coming to University of South Australia today is also a way to nurture this relationship, bring together students, research, collaborative research projects. So thank you again for being with us today. I would like to announce that there will be another important event hosted by UniSA later this week. French ambassador to Australia, Christophe Penaud, will give a conference about the French-Australian partnership, though it will be about submarine a little bit too, again. And of course, this conference is guaranteed 0% fake news. Finally, I would like to make a little announcement or maybe a call for help. This conference has been most certainly the very first highlight of Arnaud's stay in Adelaide this week. There will be a second highlight, and that would be the final of the Europa League that will see the Olympique de Marseille competing against the Atlético de Madrid later this week. Arnaud is desperately looking for a way to watch this game in Adelaide. I have to say that it would be at 4 in the morning, so it's a bit of a challenge. So if anybody in this room is able to provide some help to Arnaud to find a way to watch that game, you will earn, I think, his gratitude forever. Yes. Thank you and good night.
Forever. Thank you.